Chapter 19. Day 2, 1800 hours. Cameron stumbled up the stairs of his front porch and fumbled in his pocket for his keys. He cleared his throat and dizzily lost balance, falling forward and slamming into the front door. He heard the wood of the door crack and giggled to himself as he worked to put the key into the lock. Stupid door, he slurred. He could smell the whiskey on his breath and blinked rapidly as he lost his grasp on his keys and dropped them to the ground. Cursing, he slowly bent over and dangled his noodle arms perpendicular to the ground as he laughed softly to himself, searching for the keys in the dark. The door swung open and Sarah glared at her husband. He fell onto his ass and looked up at her, smiling like a child.
"Where the hell have you been, Cameron?"
Sarah asked, livid.
"It's 3 a.m. I've been worried sick. You didn't answer your phone. You didn't call me back. I'm sick of living like this."
"It's okay, baby," Cameron grunted as he pushed himself up off the ground. He swayed back and forth in place and smiled at his wife, breathing out an invisible cloud of whiskey smell. Don't worry about me."
"You drove home like this?"
Sarah stepped forward and pounded her fist into Cameron's arm.
"What's wrong with you? How did you end up like this?"
Cameron staggered in place as he stared at his wife. He looked at her and couldn't keep his feelings buried any longer. All he saw was betrayal. "You did this to me," Cameron whispered. "You and your bitching."
"Well, the bitching has only started, Cameron," she screamed. "You have to get your shit together. You have 3 daughters to support. 3 daughters and a wife."
"Yeah?" Cameron cocked his head and continued staggering in place. "Yeah, what about me? Who's supposed to take care of me? You? That's pretty hard for you to do, and you're fucking my boss behind my back." Sarah snorted and stepped back. She was at a loss for words. She took hold of his arm and tried to pull him inside.
"We're not having this conversation right now. Just come in and go to bed."
"No!" Cameron yelled as he jerked his arm away. "You fucking whore! Why would you do that to me?"
"Cameron, stop!"
Sarah was suddenly in tears.
"Stop!"
"You ruined my life!" Cameron roared. "I gave everything I had for you, for our girls. You fucked it away with my boss." Cameron pulled out his cell phone. "Now, I'm about to lose my job and my family because Gary the dick is about to get his ass beat."
"Please, Cameron!" Sarah screamed. "Please, stop!"
Cameron growled, lost in a fury. He stepped closer to Sarah, but suddenly something latched around his arm and surprised him. Cameron flailed his body, inadvertently smacking the daughter he had not heard approach him across the face. She gasped and fell backward, immediately sobbing, and Cameron's eyes grew wide. "No," Cameron whispered. "No, baby. Daddy's sorry." Cameron looked down at Courtney, whose eyes were filled with fear. Her nose was bleeding, and she was crawling backward to get away from her father.
"Come on, baby!"
Sarah frantically yelled as she helped Courtney stand back up.
"Pack your bags. We're going to go stay with Aunt Jessica for a while. Go!"
Sarah looked at Cameron with a furious expression and smacked him across the face. He broke into tears and collapsed under the weight of his sorrow.
"Congratulations, Cameron,"
Sarah spat at him.
"You've become your father."
"No!" Cameron bellowed as his eyes shot open and he sat up. He panted heavily and sweated wildly as he scanned his dark surroundings. He once again found himself in the darkness. "No!" he repeated as tears welled up in his eyes. "Not this! Not me!" He pounded his fists against the wall next to him and let out a loud scream before he finally broke down into sobbing. "I can't," he told himself as he hugged his knees. He lowered his head and his tears dropped into a puddle onto the floor. He was alone, and he had just learned that he was no better than his father. Rage filled him, and he stood up, charging a fireball. "No!" he repeated. He slammed his palm into the wall, and the fireball exploded, collapsing it. He briefly stared at the broken wall, and then scanned the area. He needed to find someone to kill. "Come on!" Cameron roared as he charged another fireball. "Come kill me! Come kill this worthless piece of shit!" He took off in a sprint toward a door he saw on the opposite side of the room he was in. He passed through the door and stopped again to search for someone. "Where are you?" he yelled. "Come get me!" Cameron continued running again until he heard the sound of footsteps echoing around him. He curled his upper lip into a scowl and pulled his pistol free. "Don't be a bitch!" he yelled. "Come fight me!" Gunfire erupted and pinged off his armor, lowering it to 380. He snorted and charged in the direction of the gunfire, raising his revolver and emptying his cylinder into his attacker. The man screamed, and Cameron hurled a fireball directly into his chest, slamming him into the wall behind him. Cameron dropped his pistol and pulled out his horny poker, thrusting it through his enemy's stomach and sending blood gushing down his hands. "You're too weak," Cameron snarled. "You're useless, fucking pitiful!" Cameron charged another fireball and held it to the man's face. The man whimpered in fear as life slowly drained from his eyes. The horny poker had knocked him, and he was dying. Cameron grit his teeth and released his fireball, blowing the man's head apart and painting the wall behind him with scorched blood. "Player Shirag eliminated. Level 9, plus 450 experience." Cameron roared at the headless corpse and spit on it, slamming his fists into the dead man's chest. "I'm sorry!" he screamed. "I'm sorry!" He was weeping again, and suddenly he felt something pierce his back. He roared with pain as his armor dropped to 260 and he spun around. Horny poker in hand, Cameron charged another fireball and dashed forward, tackling his attacker to the ground. Cameron heard cries of fear and pleading, but they did not register with his humanity. He held his flaming hand under the struggling person's chin and released his fireball, shearing off his opponent's face and killing him with critical damage. "Player Scott eliminated. Level 8, plus 200 experience. Fireball skill unlocked, plus 5 experience." Cameron growled with fury as he pushed himself up off the dead enemy. He looked around like a madman, hunched over and frothing at the mouth. Finally, he heard movement in the corner and took off in a sprint toward the noise. Cameron rammed his body into the person he found, yielding a surprised shout. The man fell to the ground and gasped as he looked up at Cameron.
"Mr. Cameron!" Bernard shouted. "Please, it is okay. It is me, Bernard. Please calm yourself, my friend."
Cameron's head twitched at the sound of Bernard's voice, and he suddenly collapsed onto the ground. As tears and brutal weeping followed, Cameron felt Bernard's arms embrace him.
"It is okay, my friend," Bernard whispered soothingly. "You saved me. It is okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cameron. I hurt them," Cameron sobbed as he buried his head into Bernard's chest. "My wife. My daughter. I hit them. I got drunk and hit them, just like my father." "You are not your father," Bernard cried out. "You are Cameron, and you are a good man." "I'm not," Cameron argued. "I hit my child." "You made a bad choice, my friend," Bernard soothed, "but it does not make you a bad man. You cannot let your mistakes define you. You can only let them show you the way. Cameron, look at me." Cameron looked up at Bernard, and Bernard smiled warmly down at him. "You are a good man," he whispered as his voice cracked from his own tears. "I have met many bad men, and you are not one of them. Let go of your anger, of your hate. You are good." Cameron sobbed as he buried his face deeper into Bernard's chest. Bernard wrapped his arms tight around his friend and shushed him. The two remained in that position for some time before Cameron started to calm down. He clung to Bernard like a child would his mother, but finally let go. "Bernard," Cameron whispered softly. "Thank you." "No, Cameron," Bernard replied as he wiped a tear away from his own eye. "I thank you." The two embraced one final time, and Cameron stood up. "Come on," Cameron beckoned. "Let's get out of here." "I am afraid that is easier said than done, my friend," Bernard sighed as he lifted his hands and revealed the chains that were bound to his wrist. "Also, they cut off my leg. I am in no position to run." "They cut off your leg?" Cameron gasped. He kneeled down and saw that only a stub remained where Bernard's lower left leg had been. He scowled and pressed his forehead against Bernard's. "Stay here, then,"
Cameron whispered. "I'll go find the others." Cameron patted the back of Bernard's head and stood up. He ran over to one of the people he had killed and picked up the gun he had used. He hurried it over to Bernard and handed the weapon over. "Stay alive, Bernard," Cameron said as he turned to find the rest of his party. "I'll come back for you." Cameron ran back into the labyrinth of hallways, keeping his eyes and ears open for any sign of his friends. For a while, he saw nothing and wondered if they were lost. He started shouting for them, hoping they would hear. Finally, Cameron found himself in a four-way cross-section and stopped. For a moment, he stood and caught his breath. The rage that had so suddenly overcome him had exhausted him. He leaned his shoulder against one of the darkened walls and breathed. The pain of his memory still lingered and swept over him as he stood alone in the corridor. He closed his eyes for a moment, resting his head against the wall, and softly cried. Sarah and Courtney had been symbols of hope for him. He thought them to be the truest and most perfect ideas his mind could ever come up with. The thought of his wife betraying him, however, paired with the knowledge that he had even accidentally struck his daughter, haunted him. "Why did you do it?" Cameron harshly whispered to himself. "Why were you so weak, Cameron?" As his breathing finally stabilized, Cameron suddenly began to feel dizzy again. His head grew heavy and his legs lost their strength. "Oh, please no," Cameron pleaded. "Not again." "Open up!" Cameron shouted as he furiously pounded his fist against the door. "Come on! I know you're in there! Open the door!" Cameron was sobbing. His truck was in the front lawn and the door was locked. Rain was falling on his head and he had soaked his clothes. He scowled and took a frustrated step back, kicking the bottom of the door out of anger. "Stop ignoring me!" Cameron pleaded. "For the first time in your worthless life, just acknowledge me!" The door swung open, and a massively built, broad-shouldered, bearded man stood in the frame. He was wearing a white wife-beater and camouflage shorts. His long, scraggly hair was pulled back with a bandana. He looked at Cameron, at first with fury in his eyes, but then they softened and he stepped forward. "Cameron?" his father gently asked as he reached out and gently stroked his son's cheek. His voice was deep and rough, but the warm undertone came as a surprise. "I thought you said you never wanted to see me again." "Well, here I am," Cameron howled, "at the doorstep of the man I hate the most." "Yeah," his father whispered. "Yes, you are." His voice broke and he lowered his head, sniffling softly. "What is wrong, son?" he asked. "Have you come to finally give it to me? To kick my ass, to cuss me out? I deserve it, boy, and I won't fight back." "The fuck is wrong with you?" Cameron shouted. Why are you acting this way?" "'Cause I've healed, son." His dad wiped a tear away from his eye and looked up at Cameron. "I was a monster after the war, after your mother died. I treated you like trash because my soul was burning. I was in hell, Cameron, and I was too weak to see past it. I did you wrong, son. I'm beyond sorry." Cameron took an unbalanced step back and shook his head. His father gave him a silent but pleading look that begged for his forgiveness. Cameron scowled and swiped his hand through the air angrily. "No!" he shouted as he backed away. "You don't get to apologize. Not after what you did. No, Dad! Fuck you!" At that, Cameron turned and ran to his truck. His father gave chase, but Cameron jumped inside and locked the doors as he turned the key. "Please, son," he shouted. "Please don't go down this road. I can smell the whiskey on your breath. You'll only hurt yourself and the ones you love. Let me help you." "Go to hell!" Cameron screamed. He shifted his truck into gear and pulled out onto the road, leaving his father behind.